I've got 6:30 on my clock, so we will now call to order the regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Commission for October 14th, 2021. Doug, can you please call roll?
Hi, we're going to do 2 roll calls tonight. The first roll call will be just for the technically officially considered the current commissioners. Then we're going to have a swear-in of the reappointed and the new commissioner. Then the second roll will include everybody. So if you don't hear your name, don't panic. You'll be included on the second roll call. So first roll call, Commissioner Johnson.
Here.
Commissioner Marin.
Here.
Commissioner Solomon.
Here.
And Chair Conroy.
Here.
And now we're going to have Vicky Kronberger from City Clerk. She'll be swearing in the reappointed commissioners and the new commissioner.
Okay, good evening. I am standing in for Eleanor Munson. And is new Commissioner Vijay Jest online? It doesn't appear so. Well, if he shows up later on, he cannot participate in the meeting until he is sworn in. So arrangements. Commissioner Samples, can you raise your right hand and repeat after me, sir?
Can you see it?
I can see it, sir. Thank you. I, Mel Samples.
I, Mel Samples.
Do solemnly swear or affirm.
Do solemnly swear or affirm.
That I will support and defend.
That I will support and defend.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
And the Constitution of the State of California.
And the Constitution of the State of California.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance.
I will bear true faith and allegiance.
To the Constitution of the United States of America.
To the Constitution of the United States of America.
And the Constitution of the State of California.
And the Constitution of the State of California.
That I take this obligation freely.
That I take this obligation freely.
Without any mental reservation.
Without any mental reservation.
Or purpose of evasion.
Or purpose of evasion.
And that I will well and faithfully discharge.
And that I will well and faithfully discharge.
The duties upon which I'm about to enter.
The duties upon which I'm about to enter.
Congratulations, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Welcome back, Mel.
Rookie.
You're the new guy.
Okay, so we'll have a second roll call. Johnson. Commissioner Marin.
Here.
Commissioner Samples.
Here.
Commissioner Solomon.
Here.
Chair Conroy.
Here.
And Commissioner Woodham is absent tonight. And Commissioner Jest is absent as well.
How do you spell Commissioner Jest's last name?
Jeste.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you, Doug. With that, we will move on to the Pledge of Allegiance. If you could please join me. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Seated. All right. All right, that takes us to item D, approval of the order of agenda. Would anyone like to change the order of agenda? Seeing no changes, are there any staff, are there any proposed changes you're aware of? Seeing, did I hear something? No? Okay, seeing none, may I get a motion to approve the order of agenda, please?
So moved.
In a second?
Second.
All right, we'll do a roll call vote. Let's see. Let's start with our newest commissioner, Commissioner Samples.
Aye.
Commissioner Solomon.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
And Commissioner Marin.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Thank you. All right, item E, blue folder items. I see we have a blue folder item tonight. Jennifer, could you please describe that blue folder item for us?
Certainly, this is the letter that is going to be in item J3 for the discussion review of the letter of recommendation to the city about updating the procurement contract and streamlining how the public works bid process works.
Great. All right, thank you, Jennifer. Is there a motion to admit this blue folder item to the record?
Motion to admit the blue folder item?
Thank you. Okay, are there any objections to admitting this item? Okay, seeing none, so ordered. And that brings us to item F, our consent calendar. There's one item on the consent calendar this evening, and it therefore will be approved in one motion. Would any members of the commission like to pull the item for discussion at this time? Okay. All right, do we have any public comment?
Motion to approve the consent calendar?
Hold on. We got to check public first. Do we have any public comments on the consent calendar?
No comments. No e-comments.
Okay. All right. Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve item F1 of the consent calendar?
Motion to approve the consent calendar?
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Seeing a motion and a second, we'll do a roll call vote. Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Marin.
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Solomon.
Aye.
Commissioner Samples.
Aye.
Okay, and the chair votes aye as well. Consent calendar items are now received and filed. Moving right along, item G, we don't have any excluded consent calendar items this evening, so we'll move on to item H, public participation on non-agenda items. This section is intended to provide members of the public with the opportunity to comment on any subject that does not appear on this agenda for action. The section is limited to 30 minutes. Each speaker, including those by Zoom, will be afforded 3 minutes to address the commission. Each speaker will be permitted to speak only once. Written requests, including email comments, if any, will be considered first under this section. Do we have any public participation on non-agenda items tonight?
None. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, moving on to item I. Next on our agenda are items continued from previous agendas. Would any commissioners like to recall any items from previous agendas for discussion at this time? All right. If there's no items from prior agendas to discuss, then we can move on to item J, items for discussion prior to action. Our first item, J1, is the election of new officers, chair and vice chair, which will just presented by Jennifer? No. Okay.
I'm verifying that. Why? Well,
So I would say at this point, we would normally open it up for nominations. At this point, I'll open up the nominations by nominating Vice Chair Woodham. He's in absentia today, but I have reached out to him via email, and he said he is open to the position. So I'll just put that out there.
Does that call for a second or a comment?
Good question. I think that ultimately it would call for a second, but we could also leave it open to additional nominations or
Yeah,
Eugene?
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah, technically what you want to do, if you're making a motion, Jason, I think you would make the motion for chairman and vice chairman, or if you're just simply making a suggestion of Commissioner Woodham as the next chair and opening that up for discussion, that wouldn't be a motion. I think Commissioner Johnson, I think just be an opening salvo for that.
Okay. If you gentlemen don't mind, why don't we just discuss it first, and then once we come to, I suppose, a consensus, then we can make a formal motion for both chair and vice chair. So with that, if there's no objections, I would nominate Commissioner Woodham, and I would also nominate for vice chair Commissioner Marin. And any questions, comments, additional nominations from our commission?
Mr. Chair, if I was going to make a nomination, I would do the same one. So that's, I was going to say second, but no, I don't mean that.
Move to close nominations.
Okay, seeing no other nominations, I will make a motion to formally nominate Commissioner Woodham for the position of chair for the coming year, and Commissioner Marin for the position of vice chair for the coming year. And I say get a second.
Now I mean it. Second.
Wonderful. All right. With that, are there any further questions or comments? Seeing none, are there any public comments on this item?
No e-comments.
Okay. All right. Then with that, we'll do a roll call vote. Commissioner Marin.
Aye.
Commissioner Samples.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
And Commissioner Solomon.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. All right. And with that, the ayes have it, and item J1 is now received and filed. Moving on to item J2. Discussion and possible action regarding approval of an agreement with Maximus US Services, Inc. for cost allocation plan processing services in the amount not to exceed $13,000. Presented by Ms. Jennifer Paul.
Thank you. I am so excited about this. So we went through the bid process, and Maximus happens to be who we utilized in the past. They came in with the best, lowest bid, and they have historical knowledge. And now I've heard some whisperings, and I think it's very interesting that I know there have been policy discussions. And so I'm new in the position. I've got fresh eyes. What we'd like to do is we have Troy here with to answer questions from Maximus. And so tonight's discussion, because we have to do this anyway, is just discussing process. And what Troy is going to do this year, which would be different than years past, is work with all the departments and have all of these notes so that at a later date, once this process of allocating internal service funds is complete, he can come back. Part of the service agreement is coming back, is the ability to come back to this commission, if you so desire, and have a discussion based on all of the notes. And then at that point, we could have a policy discussion. And Troy does work with other cities, is very well versed in this. We will have that kind of year over year historical comparison and the variances. And yeah, I'm excited to dig into this. I know this is a really hot topic, and then I'm sure you can see all of the details in this. And I'm also sure, since you guys, again, have some subject matter expertise, having discussed this before, most likely have some questions for Troy. And I have Rob here as well, who did go through, Robert Norman on my team, who went through the whole bidding process too, if you have questions about that. But again, I did kind of flush that out with him, and it kind of seems like a no-brainer to go ahead and go with them. Also, I just want to be really clear too. We want to bring this to council for November 2nd. And so what council had done is they definitely wanted us to bring this in front of this commission here to discuss. It would be fantastic if we could have your recommendation to go to council. Regardless what was explained to me, I talked with Mike about this as well, is we do need to move forward with this because it is a system in place. And so it will be according to the APP this year. But again, like I had stated earlier, we could have discussions about kind of future state and what that looks like. Do you have any questions for me about that? Or should we dig in with Troy?
Seeing no hands, why don't we let Troy take over?
Wonderful. Thank you.
Make sure I've got my good evening. I hope everybody's doing well. Appreciate the opportunity to come in and speak in front of y'all. We're excited about the opportunity. As Jennifer mentioned, it's a little more expanded scope than what we've done in the past, where we'll actually be meeting with all of the department heads and various, what we refer to as central service departments, discuss the various services that they provide and look at a way to what type of other allocation metrics may be available since the policy's been in place that maybe you could look at going forward as a way to refresh or update or possibly improve upon the current allocation process. Obviously, you have an APP already in place that defines the allocation methodologies, but we're just looking at this as an opportunity not only to refresh the plan for the most recent fiscal year costs and allocation statistics and metrics, but also, again, take the opportunity to discuss with departments the types of information they may have that maybe we'll look forward to in a future process of implementing maybe a new policy or making changes as appropriate. So if you have any questions, I'll be glad to respond to those.
Commissioner Solomon.
Thank you, Chair Conroy. Thank you, Troy and Jennifer. For Troy, I noticed in the packet that there won't be any on-site visits with the department heads, which is understandable considering we're still operating under COVID conditions. Are there challenges or disadvantages that you see to not being able to be on site? And then if there are, how do you plan on overcoming those?
No, that's an excellent question. Truthfully, we've been pleasantly surprised through the past year and a half of how well Zoom and web conferences have been going with departments. In fact, it's been our experience that most of our clients actually appreciate doing it that way. I mean, it is always helpful to be on site, but what we're finding is a lot of our clients aren't on site themselves. Previously when we were on site, if you're sitting down with them at their desk and we're talking about what type of information may be available, they can quickly access work files or papers and so forth and pull it up and discuss what might be available. But the fact that everybody's kind of been working remotely, a lot of folks do have remote access now and are able to pull it up. We're able to immediately pull up files and share them on our screen to look at them and say, okay, is this something you're talking about? Would this be reasonable? Does this make sense? So we found that there's been very few obstacles, honestly, to being on site versus doing everything virtually.
Okay, thank you for that. Some of our department heads are elected officials.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be a challenge for a consultant or somebody reviewing or overseeing their processes. Some people can be territorial about their departments, which is understandable. You don't have to be an elected official to be territorial.
Right.
But for the elected officials, I'll put it bluntly. You may not get a level of cooperation that you would expect, and I'm curious as to what your thought process is behind running into any roadblocks or slow processes or difficulties with a department head. What are your experiences? You've worked in Redondo. I'm sure that everybody's been extremely cooperative, but just as an idea of what might happen if you run into something where that's just the way we've always done it.
Sure. No, again, that's a great question because we do frequently run into those situations where, you are working with, and I work throughout the country with various places. And as you said, some places the finance director is an elected official. So we often have to work with those type of situations where, oftentimes we approach it from why we're doing it to try and get the buy-in. And I think most officials, whether elected or not, appreciate the fact that we're trying to do something that's best for the city or the county, that we're working with. And the real benefit is, we really can't meet the objectives of doing right for the citizens of the government if we're not getting their participation and cooperation. And very rarely, I think when you approach it that way, you don't end up with too much of a roadblock. Now, we understand that all department heads are often very extremely busy. And we say that, if it makes sense for you personally not to be able to involve in this process, please feel free to delegate to one of your assistants, or if there's a fiscal manager within your department that would have the same type of information available to them, we would gladly work with them as well. But we found that most often, through communication, we're able to get buy-in. And I think at the end of the day, regardless of how busy they are, they do want to do what's best for the city.
Okay. Commissioner Johnson, before I ask my next question, did you want to jump in on that?
I don't want to disturb your flow. I'll go after you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Johnson. There's been some hot topics in Redondo with regard to process and procurement. We had a rather extensive report created by Moss Adams reviewing some of our internal controls, and hopefully that would be provided to you. A lot of that information is dated. It started back in 2014, but a lot of it, while some of it has been addressed, some of it has not. One of the hottest topics is procurement for our professional services by department heads. They have an autonomy to procure that is pretty broad. And I don't know if that's within the scope of what you're going to review as far as our processes are concerned or not. Can you tell me if that's going to happen that way?
No, sorry, that wouldn't be within the scope of what we're doing as far as looking at the delegation of responsibilities within departments. What we'll be doing is meeting with all of the central service departments, and it is things like purchasing, finance, accounting, budget, human resources, IT, and discussing the various services that they do perform on behalf of all of the city departments, and talk about those various services and what type of allocation metrics would be, best representative of the level of service that's being provided to all of the departments, and quantifying that level of effort so that we can allocate costs equitably and appropriately. So we wouldn't necessarily be looking at authority matrix, it sounds like, or those type of procedures as far as purchasing abilities by the individual departments. Okay,
thank you for clarifying that. And the last question is a simple one. Are your direct reports going to be to our finance director, Jennifer Paul?
Yes, sir. Well, whoever the city wants to appoint as the city's project manager, whether it's Jennifer herself or someone else, we'll be working directly with them. Yes, sir.
Okay, so that'll be something determined at council then. Maybe Jennifer, you know that, or?
That's a great question. I will research that. Probably because I believe it was Marnie in the past, so it makes sense to work with me on that, I believe.
Okay, it would make sense. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the time, Troy.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Commissioner Johnson.
Hi, Mr. Tangent. Nice to have you here. Thank you. I had two really quick questions. And I apologize if you covered the first one. How often do we use a firm like yours to refresh the allocations?
Most of the clients that we work with is on an annual basis. I believe the city's been preparing updates to the plan based on actual fiscal year data, I believe every 2 years. Marnie, most recently I worked with Marnie on that. I believe that was based on 2018 actuals. But typically when we're preparing plans, most governments either require it for federal or state grant claiming purposes. And in those situations, we're preparing the plans annually because that's generally have to be compliant with federal regulations. However, many clients also do it annually anyway, but some may do it every 2 years. If they're on a 2-year budget cycle, they may look at it every 2 years to do it. If they're primarily using it for seeking reimbursement from their enterprise funds, their other proprietary funds like the internal service funds, or if they have any special revenue funds. And if that's the primary purpose of why they're preparing the plans, it's maybe every 2 years, but most often, the most frequent is annually.
We do it annually, just
Okay.
at mid-year.
Yeah. So
Actuals of the year before.
that probably self-answers my next question, which could be either to you or to Ms. Paul, which is this would be sort of an iterative update and review of known data. There's not a lot of contentious allocations that we need to, that we're concerned about, or that members of council or commissions or the public has expressed a lot of concern with.
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. I have a couple questions. My first being, for Mr. Tangent, Ms. Paul, it relates to transparency in this process. I was just curious, what level of transparency is available to the public as far as support schedules for, your findings? Is that available, or is it just a finished report put out by either you or the city? What do we got?
No, exactly. So the result of our study is what's referred to as a cost allocation plan that includes all of the supporting schedules within the plan itself. It will include a narrative related to the overall process and approach, the procedures that are used to determine the allocations and the process that's involved. And then for each central service department, there's a narrative. There's a discussion of the costs that are included from the city's financials, and then how they are determined or subpooled for allocation purposes, and then what those a narrative description of what those allocation metrics are that were used to allocate each service, and then the supporting schedules provide the actual detail. So the entire plan from beginning to end is completely auditable. It's available for everybody to trace the expenditure and allocations throughout the plan to see ultimately how much is allocated to each department or fund from every central service department. And most of our clients actually post the resulting cost allocation plan on their website. They for transparency purposes, most do post both what we refer to as a full cost and a federal cost allocation plan. They'll typically post both of them so that the public can review if they have any questions, as well as any other folks within the city.
Thank you for that. And on that point, I noticed in your proposal, you mentioned the MaxCap software that you use. So as part of that transparency and that information you're saying that is often provided, would that include either access to data, obviously not to manipulate, but like a view-only set of data that can either be downloaded or some way worked with?
Not from the system itself. The system itself, the resulting cost allocation plan is produced as a PDF document, but we typically don't provide access to the software itself or the system.
Well, yeah, okay. If not, okay. So just PDF, we couldn't get it like in a CSV or anything where you could actually look at the data,
we can provide some of the detail schedules in Excel. We can provide that as well. That functionality is fully within the system. But the plan itself is typically a PDF compiled.
If that's not too much trouble for you, I personally would like to see that additional level of access to the data.
Okay, absolutely. Absolutely, that can be done.
Great, thank you. That's all I had for now. Commissioner Samples.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Tangent, two things. First of all, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're looking at our actual expenses, actual department costs, and determining the allocations if the allocations are appropriate. But there is nothing in there that examines, for instance, if we have a department that's incredibly inefficient and overspends, but they're able to basically bury all of their costs in other department allocations. Does this uncover any of that? And what do you do with it if there is a case like that?
Yeah, unfortunately, the level of detail that we go into, we wouldn't necessarily be looking at the appropriateness or the efficiency of the departments. We're pretty much would be taking their costs at face value as recorded in the city's financial statements. So we wouldn't necessarily look at now, we can approach it from, the sense of peer, comparing it to peer governments. Do things look, higher, lower than we would typically see? But I'm always cautious with that because no two governments are really the same. Organizations are different, services are defined differently within departments. So it's very risky to make those type of comparisons. We've gone down that road in the past trying to come up with, comparing cities by size and then saying, is, $2.23 per accounting transaction reasonable or standard? And there's just too many variables involved that I think you could ever get into the point of truly making an apples to apples comparison, at least through the cost allocation process as we typically do it.
Okay, so in your scope of work, that no matter how you went about trying to identify, justify, or evaluate that, that's not in this scope of work. That's what I was trying to make sure.
Correct. Yes, sir. That is not in the scope of work. That is correct.
Okay. One other, and this is your professional opinion. This is an iterative analysis that we as a commission have talked about many times. And one of the alternatives that we've discussed is proposing to the city council that we at least do a one-time zero-based budget in order to reset all of the baselines. In your professional experience, this iterative approach that you're doing, do we start losing granularity over time? Does that make sense, or can you provide any thoughts on it?
I understand the benefits of zero-based budgeting. What I'm not sure about is necessarily if the cost allocation approach is going to give you a lot of detail or insight into that process. It may do so from the sense that you will have the results of how much each central service department serves other departments of the city, and looking at it from that perspective, because that will be clearly documented within the cost allocation process. What we find is oftentimes central service departments at the conclusion of the cost allocation process really like the document because it lets them give a complete transparent insight as to who are their biggest customers and what are the cost drivers for those services that they're providing to those other departments. And oftentimes they're able to say, yes, we need to, spend more time with the utilities department because they are, the lion's share of our services that they're consuming. So we'll give you those type of perspectives. I'm just hesitant to say that would be, the Rosetta Stone of doing zero-based budgeting, if you will.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yes, sir. No, thank you.
Commissioner Solomon.
You said something there, Troy, that really resonated, which was through this process, the ability to recognize who are the biggest customers of the departments. And to me, that sounds like a way of helping streamline or improve our ISF allocation. And that's been something that's sort of, in a lot of ways, in Redondo Beach, been an enigma wrapped inside of a mystery and contained within a puzzle.
Right.
Some of our processes are simply are created and have been used by staff just for years as our default. Not any sort of out of the box solution, but something that we've created our own witch's brew of. We have in the past had trouble with our ISF funds and having them reviewed for the Harbor Enterprise Fund. So I'm really encouraged by hearing that this will look towards those sorts of breakdowns and improve the ISF, because it is something that I really can see the city benefiting from this project. So I'm very excited about that. And thank you for mentioning that. It's really valuable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, because we understand that a lot of times methodologies become dated over years. So it definitely gives a chance to give you a new perspective on some things as we go through this process.
All right. Troy, I understand why, your reasons for not wanting to compare, because no two cities are exactly the same. But is there any part of your process in working with the different departments or working with Ms. Paul or whoever you're assigned as your point of contact, where you give any kind of feedback or any sort of opinion beyond just, the allocations themselves?
I mean, we'll present the information. Again, Ms. Paul and others within the city would have a better perspective as to whether or not a cost seems reasonable. Again, we're kind of approaching from the sense of, once costs are recorded in your financials, that, they have been vetted either through the budgeting process or the purchasing process as to appropriateness. But for us to provide a true insight, I'm always hesitant to do that, just because, it can. I'm not in a position to say whether or not a cost is appropriate or not. That ultimately would be within the city to make that determination.
So it'd be fair to say that the services and the final product that you provide is purely a mechanical function.
To some degree. I mean, again, our goal is to provide valuable information as far as, from our experience, what may be improved allocation methodologies or approaches to allocating costs based on, what we work with within the city and determine. Again, we haven't really at this point done any true fact finding at this point to really make an assessment one way or the other. The APP clearly defines the methodologies that are approved for use in the overhead cost study. So, we're definitely going to comply with those, at least through this first iteration, if you will. But the goal is throughout this process, be able to gather new information or additional information or better information that may be useful to the city going forward. That you may want to look at for a policy change down the road of implementing, if it ends up being a more equitable allocation or more defensible allocation and determination of costs.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right, I don't see any other hands. Are there any comments or questions from our commission? Any additional ones this evening for Mr. Tangent? Okay. All right, hearing none, then do we have any public comments on this item?
No e-comments.
No e-comments and nothing from Ms. Paul. All right, with that, then I'd like to thank Mr. Tangent for coming out and going through this with us. And I will entertain a motion to receive and file item J2.
I think, Jennifer, correct me, are you looking for a motion here for us to make a recommendation to council to engage Maximus US Services, or is this a receive and file?
It's a receive and file, but a recommendation would be icing on the cake.
Okay. I'll make a motion.
Go ahead.
I'll make a motion then to recommend to City Council that we engage Maximus US Services for cost allocation processing services in the amount not to exceed $13,000.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Jennifer, I assume that we can do one roll call vote that does both that as well as receive and file, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Wonderful. All right, with that, then we will do a roll call vote. Let's begin with Commissioner Samples, please.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Solomon.
Aye.
Commissioner Marin. All right, and the chair votes aye as well. All right, with that, we have now, what have we done? We've made a recommendation to council and we've received and filed item J2. Thank you again, Mr. Tangent.
Thank you. Y'all have a great evening. Appreciate it.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that brings us to our final item for discussion prior to action this evening, item J3, discussion and review of the letter of recommendation to City Council from this commission regarding the opportunities to streamline public works contracts procurement. And that is also our blue folder item. Jennifer, your name's next to this. If
Of course it is.
yeah, but I will just say that Commissioner Solomon and Commissioner Samples did a great job on this, working together. And I was pulled in at the last moment just to change a comma to a period or something like that. But gentlemen, I would like to hear from both of you. Commissioner Samples, would you like to start things off?
I will just say that it was an interesting exercise because I went down the path of getting far too in the weeds, and I really appreciated Commissioner Solomon dragging me back into reality and making sure that we were doing something clear and concise and readable and usable. So I'm very happy with what we have. Jennifer, I can say that from the way you presented this in the first place, I can see that we have some level of change of attitude and methodology, and I'm looking forward to working with you and our staff as it's evolving throughout the city over the next several months. I think we've got some great opportunities here.
Commissioner Samples.
Thank you. Commissioner Solomon, would you like to add anything?
Just say thank you to Mel and Chair Conroy for helping and making recommendations. The letter, as one could see, essentially broke down into two things, which was the first goal, keeping it simple and making a recommendation to council that we as a city and we as a commission recommend the updating of something that hasn't been visited since 1990, but not holding them down to a specific number and asking them to rely on staff and some of the tiered processing from the general law cities to come up with a number and indexing it. I watched the video again to try and make certain that I captured, in Mel and I and Jason captured what the commission wanted and agreed to at the last meeting. I will tip my cap to Commissioner Johnson, who provides me with lots of good catchphrases and language. So I made sure to include the word velocity in there because I thought we definitely want to act with, see us acting with velocity. So thank you for that. In absentia for the letter writing process, Commissioner Johnson, thank you for that contribution. Also, though, we did include there a request of the council, which was to recognize that there is a need for us to update a lot of our procurement and processes. And we'd like to, at some point, like to take a stab at something like that and asking them to empower us to do something. We've talked about a lot. They've talked a lot about it at council. So I think along with Mel and Jason, we captured exactly what the commission wanted. And in the option 2 part of it, with giving us some work to do as a commission that can help improve everything in the city. The last thing would be, I'd like to echo Commissioner Samples' remarks as liaison for us, Jennifer, the enthusiasm for getting this on the agenda and bringing this to the council is really welcome. And speaking for myself, makes us feel like, you know, it's great. It's great to be part of the process and solving problems. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you, Commissioner Solomon. Yeah, just to briefly echo a couple points. Certainly, engaging with velocity is very important. I kind of feel like that's been a theme for this commission for a little while now, and I love it because that's one of the biggest criticisms of government at all levels, is that it's a lot of talk but not as much action. And I just and this really goes out to you too, Jennifer. Your approach on this with the last meeting, and basically, you know, there's people that find problems and there's people that find solutions, and I can see in you a person that can find solutions. So we all really appreciate that. And yeah, we just want to continue to do our work and serve and benefit the council as well as the people of the city of Redondo Beach. So all right. With that, I will just say it was very important. You'll get a chance to talk again, Eugene. But I do want to say real quick that, you know, the reason we brought this letter back to look at as a commission is because we really do want this to represent the views of everybody. So if you haven't yet, and if there's anything that you have a question about or you want to add or subtract from this, I would just highly encourage you, all commissioners, to mention it. And with that, I will recognize Commissioner Solomon.
Just a quick note for Jennifer, I left the one segment there when we were putting this together for you to fill in the appropriate charter and code section there, which I'm sure you caught, but I just wanted to make note for everyone else why I framed it the way I did.
So you'll be able to fill that in for us?
Yes, and just to confirm, so I do have the options up too. I can include that original staff report that that we showed from 2018 that shows the options specifically. Did you want that included as well? Because
I think in preparing it, since it references the tiered approach from the UPCCA, that it would be helpful that it was included. We referenced the previous meeting, and that tiered approach, should the council, upon with recommendation from the department heads, choose that, they could see it represented. I think it would be a good idea to please include.
Wonderful.
Yes.
I'll include all that.
All right, Commissioner Marin.
Yeah, no, I was just going to comment on the letter. I think it's absolutely in line with what we discussed at the last meeting, and it's articulate and to the point, and yeah, I'm fully in support of it.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Marin. Okay, so Jennifer, I believe you said at the last meeting that this would be something that would be agendized for City Council. Was that
Yeah, thank you.
correct with that?
Thank you, Chair Conroy. So, and I think it's stated in this letter as well. So I did obtain a little bit more clarification on that because I thought I had a little more clout than I apparently do. And it does state it quite clearly actually in this letter. So since this is a charter change, this would be included in all of the materials that are submitted at that time to council as part of the charter change. And I think it was written quite clearly in this particular letter that there is the understanding that that this is an adjustment within that city charter. So it wouldn't be a standalone item. I had originally thought I could do that. I found out I can't with this. So if that is clear, and I did discuss it with Mike, and you know, I'm not exactly sure about timing, but when that is an item for council, this will be a part of that packet. The other option, if you do want it to stand out more, would be not to come from me, but for one of you to read it out loud at City Council as part of, I believe it's public comment. So again, thanks for bearing with me while I still learn city politics. And correct me if my assumption is inaccurate, but from reading the letter, it did seem like that the understanding was this would be part of that packet submitted to council. And in approving that packet, council would be approving this piece as well. Is that your understanding, co-writers?
Jennifer, I think part of our conversation in putting this together is that there are a lot of moving pieces in this. The long lead time item is the city charter, which we've got to wait for an election before that changes. But in the meantime, there are city ordinances, municipal code, policies, those kinds of things. And we didn't, with the material that we had, we didn't have a clear picture of what of those could be set in motion before there's a charter change and how that might work. So we could use some guidance from you or from Mike to determine how that goes.
Great question. So what I'd love to do, if this is all right with you, I'll take this. I did tell Mike about this. And now that we've got this wonderful draft, I can take it to him and talk to him about what next steps are and what timing would be. Does that seem like an appropriate next step?
Sure.
Okay.
I think recognizing that there's two components to it. One way, I think, to modify a little bit of what you mentioned just now, Jennifer, is to say submit it as a blue folder item, and then one or more of us could comment and ask the council to read through that, recognizing that some of this is going to be for a different time, but some of it is also asking us to get permission or letting them know we'd like to dig into something that can be done immediately.
Right.
And maybe that can be part of the discussion with Mike as to, is that something that needs to be an agendized discussion and referral from the city council? Or can we make that referral here to staff and say, we'd like to dig into this. Do we need to can we have you agendize that here for us? Or do we have to get that from city council? And I think it would be better if it came from city council to say, here's a project from the Budget and Finance Commission, so that it doesn't lay around like a 3-day-old fish.
Yeah, that's my concern as well, especially with the first part of the letter. Clearly, there's a need to move forward on this, and I don't know when council's scheduled to review the other potential charter changes, but it sounds like that's a ways off. So I like the idea of having it be a blue folder item, potentially speaking to it that way. Also, another way to get it in front of council, the things we've done in the past is we've emailed things, but I mean, I feel like that's, even though it ends up being from our commission, that feels more like public participation. Well, actually it is at that point. And I guess it kind of takes me all the way back to the beginning, which is we serve at the interest of the council, but sometimes it feels like we're not able, to me, I'm speaking on my behalf now, like we're not able to get our recommendations to them timely. And in a method that it's up for their discussion in their regularly scheduled meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Solomon and Chair Conroy. I hear you. I'm definitely hearing you. So in my conversation with, I can ask, because when I first talked with him about this, my understanding, and maybe I'm off, was that this would be presented to council as far as the charter changes within a few months. So to me, that timing seems appropriate. If not, it's interesting because I really yearn to strategize in business with the limitations placed upon me. And again, politicking is quite a new thing. So again, when I say I hear you in the sense that you don't want to necessarily come from the standpoint of a public comment, because here you are collaborating with us. And that's where my original intention was, oh, you've stated this, let me bring that to the council. Again, it's a little bit more nuanced. And so I'd love to, if it's okay with you all, kind of reiterate those concerns to Mike and strategize with him to see how can we have this be heard from the standpoint of a collaborative effort, and you want to be able to move forward on this as a city, collaborative commission. Is that an accurate assumption? And going to Mike with all, with that, and then again, bringing it back to our next meeting and seeing what I can come back with. It's funny, sometimes I don't know what I don't know, and I'm not exactly sure what to ask. So this is really helpful for me to gain a better understanding of where you're coming from and what the objectives are. And again, like I said, I had thought from Mike that charter change was going in a few months. So let me ask you this. So if it is going in a few months, would this being a part of that change be sufficient as far as this letter being part of that packet that's submitted to council and again, in that sense, it would be agendized, not as a singular item, but as part of the whole packet so that information is public and your recommendation is public.
Well, Jennifer, let me ask this.
Mm-hmm.
Your impression of what you've brought to us and the budgeting process, the CIP process, how extensive, what's your thought of how extensive it is? Because within our city, the focus has always been around the capital improvement projects, the budgeting, and public works projects. But some of the things that you talk about sounds like it extends to basically all of our procurement processes. everything from budgeting and bid processes and transparency, all the way to recurring charges that are going to P cards. Where are you in that? What's your thought process?
Oh, so I thought that this scope was narrowed to just the capital improvement project bid process that we talked about before.
Okay.
So that was, yeah, that's all I was.
Okay. All right.
We can hopefully get into that another time. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Solomon, did you have an answer for Jennifer's question, or did you have another comment to make?
I do. I have a couple of ideas for Jennifer. So also having, so a little bit of background. When we had this presented to us in 2018, it was Mike Wadzanski and Andy Wingy who came to our meeting and presented it. So I don't think it's unfair, and I've talked to him about this also, to say that this is something that I know Mike and Andy would really like to get done. And I think that that kind of support is going to be helpful in moving the ball forward. As a secondary matter, I think we could maybe have it where the staff, through taking the political maze through here, the staff through city manager items could say to the council, this is something that's going to come up during possible charter changes. We'd like to get the department heads going on coming up with an idea of what these numbers would look like when or if the council decides to change this code, this section of the code.
Right.
So that it wouldn't be an additional delay where, okay, city council decides, yes, we agree this needs to be updated, and then assigns the department heads, such as Mr. Saman or our community services or anybody else who might have public works, that the way that we could get it going now would be to have the council agree to let the department heads look at this and what they would want to see the numbers updated to. And that creates or continues our inertia, velocity, or any other word we want to use to describe continuing this process and getting it going. The last thing I would suggest is that, please, if you would, in your conversations with Mike, it has been suggested that a change here may not require a charter amendment, that there may be ways of massaging the language or changing the language to help update it now without it being a charter change, which would also bring it forward in a more expeditious way. So if you wouldn't mind asking him if there are parts of this that can be updated without a charter change. And those are just, I guess, a few suggestions here. I wouldn't guess, I'm saying a few suggestions of managing this process so that we continue with moving this ball forward.
And then I would just, I agree. And I would just say that's why the importance of tying it to, index to inflation or some other format. So the number is a living number. It's not a static number where it can get so stale, is an important part of any change that is made. Commissioner Marin, please.
Yeah, actually, I agree a lot with what Commissioner Solomon just said. I think the goal being, how do we find alternative? If this has to just sit in a pile with everything else, that's probably not the best approach. And so how do we expedite it? So looking at different alternatives, as Commissioner Solomon proposed. Another one being, I guess the intent of this letter in the first place was that time was of the essence and that we wanted to kind of kick this off. And so this letter, I don't think is adequate or appropriate to put in the file. I don't think there's a direction or any type of insight or detail around it. So if we can do one or two of the alternatives that Commissioner Solomon presented, that'd be great. If not, do we want to continue with the subcommittee and go deeper and build a real actual proposal for them to consider if this was to go inside of kind of all the other possible changes? It's, I think there's different approaches that if the policy about how these things get evaluated makes it difficult for us, other than through public comment, to do anything, let's think about other alternatives.
Thank you, Commissioner Marin. Yeah, Mel originally had a much longer and more in-depth version of this, and we intentionally, as was discussed, trimmed it down to make it a more bite-sized, digestible for more immediate action. So maybe it's a two-pronged approach, something like this that with your help, that we can get some action or consideration on in the near term. And then we're more than happy to dust off Mel's original version, and that can be a part of a bigger stack. All right. Jennifer, any feedback on what you heard?
Yeah, this is great. Thank you so much, everybody. This is really, really helpful because I try to get as much information as I can, so I'm not going back and forth a million times. So thank you so much for kind of the comprehensive information. I do think I have with the letter, and then the option for a deeper dive and an option possibly to update the policy without a charter change if there is room for that, or what next steps would be. And again, I will emphasize to Mike, reiterate, he came in on this original. I know it's something he wants to push forward too. So we're all on the same page on this, which is great. It's just, what's the best approach? How can we feel heard? How can we take some action and move with velocity? I love that. I'm going to be using that forward and not stall anymore. And so basically, I'll ask him, what action steps can I take and what can I bring to you all? What do you need to take for something to actually happen on this? Does that sound like an accurate assumption? Yeah. When it gets started to talk.
That sounds great. Question for you though. How's that communication going to come back to us? Do we have to wait till next month's meeting? Is it something where you can send out, what your findings were prior to the next meeting? Obviously the sooner the better from our position.
Of course. So I'm still, again, learning specifics in politics. I would love to be able to communicate that back in an email, if that's, as soon as I can figure something out from him. Would that work for everybody? Kind of like I sent out that other information via email. I mean, just so people aren't waiting around for it.
In my opinion, that would be
You can send
great.
an email to us. We just caution everybody not to respond to the email, all of us.
Right. We can't reply all or whatever, but we can, correct me if I'm wrong, but we can reply to you, Jennifer. Yeah. Okay. I think that sounds the best. And once again, your efforts are much appreciated by all of us.
Thank you.
All right.
Well.
All right. Gentlemen commissioners, do we have any further questions or comments regarding this item? Seeing none. Are there any public comments? Again, seeing none. Then I will ask to receive a motion to receive and file.
Do we approve the letter to send to council? Is that what we're doing today?
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Sorry.
I have to have more than one gear, right? Okay. So
It's all right.
we get it.
I think
I'll make a motion.
You'd think I would have learned something in a year. Yes, please. Can I get a motion, Commissioner Solomon?
I'm sorry, Commissioner Samples, did you have something?
Well, I think you and I were going down the same path. My comment was approve the letter to be, the details that you mentioned to be inserted in the letter, and that it be prepared and signed by Chair Conroy for delivery to the council. I think that's where you were going. If I'm wrong.
Or do we want to hold off until Jennifer has an opportunity to kind of have more internal discussions and figure out what's the best approach? Like, is this letter ready to go?
Yeah.
I agree. Why don't we do this? We'll wait to hear back from Jennifer, and then I think that Commissioner Samples, Commissioner Solomon, and myself could reply as a group if the rest of the commission's comfortable with that. and have a little dialogue with the four of us on next steps prior to next month's meeting.
So you want to continue this item till next month's meeting as a placeholder for the feedback from Jennifer and the city?
That'd be my position.
I feel like we are waiting on some answers that Jennifer won't have until she speaks with Mike and right. So I don't know what we would.
So then the motion would be to continue this item, receive and file and continue this item until our next meeting when we have feedback from Finance Director Paul and city staff on our comments tonight. I'll make that as a motion.
Second.
Commissioner Samples, do you have anything to add?
I was just, unless Jennifer can give us any reason that we must act prior to the next meeting, I would absolutely agree with this.
Yes, I agree. So as far as the email, I don't want it to be a violation of the Brown Act. So I think, if it's all right with you all, as far as timing, I know timing is of the essence, but I think maybe we should wait till, like, I could send an email, but as far as discussing, I think we should hold off until the next meeting. I just don't want to violate any rules or acts.
Or I guess the alternative would be if we sought authority from the commission that Commissioner Solomon, Chair Conroy, and myself could review whatever you've got and then move it forward in the interim. That would be, I think, the alternative.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to propose. Maybe not well, but I thought it wouldn't be there would be no violation of Brown Act if it was just 3 commissioners and you, Finance Director Paul.
Presuming no material changes, that's a good way to go.
I think that's great.
Okay.
And my understanding is that the correct read is you don't have a quorum as long as you maintain the group integrity, no discussing it with any of the other commissioners or talking about what the other commissioners might have said and or forwarding the email out, then we should be okay.
Right.
As John Wooden says, be quick, but don't hurry.
Yeah, even if we can just cut it in half by having one back and forth before the next meeting, that's still be moving things forward quicker, which is always better. Wonderful.
Makes
okay.
sense.
Okay. So do we need to do a new motion or were we just discussing the motion that was presented and seconded? I think we're okay to vote on the motion on the floor. Is that correct?
Well, the motion on the floor was to continue it. I think we need to vote on that. And the new motion would be seek the authority of the commission for the 3 of us to work over any particular details. And to Commissioner Johnson's point that this letter is materially intact. We may add a few details like charter number, ordinance numbers or something, but materially we're not going to change this. And if it's appropriate, then we would move it forward before the next meeting.
Would it be okay with you, Mel, if we had the original motion and then that your remarks as a friendly amendment that I would accept and then the seconder would have to accept as well?
Yeah, I think that would work.
To avoid having 2 roll calls.
Okay.
So I think Commissioner Marin, did you second the motion? So I would be fine with Commissioner Samples' friendly amendment if Commissioner Marin was okay with it as well.
All right, we have a motion, a friendly amendment, and a second. And with that, gentlemen, we will do a roll call vote, beginning with Commissioner Marin.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Samples.
Aye.
Commissioner Solomon.
Aye.
All right, and the chair votes aye as well. Item J3 is received and filed. Is that okay? Okay. Fantastic. All right. Thank you all. And that brings us to item K. Next, we'll move on to our member items and referrals for staff. This month we will begin. Let's begin with Commissioner Johnson.
So I have one really small item, and the first I say a little bit in jest. Don't fall too much in love with velocity, because everyone will chase after you and say that everything you do, this is not velocity. I can't believe that I had to sign this piece of paper. So watch out what you ask for. Having said that, in the interest of velocity, I know when we had a joint meeting, I saw something that was very interesting when they're going through procedural things like approving the agenda and things like that. It seemed like they didn't go through a roll call vote every time, but did a voice vote and called for all ayes and all nays. And I'm wondering if that's something that's, not being an expert on the rules of order, is that something that's appropriate as we go through those preliminary or non-contentious agenda items?
I think you can ask for any objection, yeah.
Well, Commissioner Johnson, to your point, originally, when we were doing these Zoom meetings, I was doing roll call votes on every single thing. Through viewing city council meetings, I kind of took the lead from Mayor Brand, and where he kind of abbreviated a couple items. Like I said, I took his lead, and I thought in the interest of moving things forward, I did. That was my rationale. But that being said, I'm also not an expert on Robert's Rules of Order, so.
No, I had not considered it was partially due to pandemic conditions where we're not sitting in the room viewing each other's body language and so forth. So I raise it as a question, not as a suggestion for anybody's consideration. Certainly it adds no more than 2 minutes to the whole meeting. So I had not seen that, and I found it interesting in the way we did it in our joint meeting.
I think it's a good idea, Stephen. I think we can do that where it'd be, do we hear any objections? Hearing none, approving it that way rather than going to a roll call. I think you can do that. Whether or not you can only do it with certain types of items is a different story. Like say for the consent calendar or approval of the agenda. I don't know if it can be limited to that or if it can be all encompassing for any item on the agenda.
So maybe it's an inquiry, and I hate to throw something to the attorneys or whoever would advise us. But maybe that's the way it works. It does sound somewhat familiar. Does anybody object to going to a voice vote rather than a roll call vote? I really don't want to.
Hearing no objections.
Yeah, well, yeah, on the blue folder items, that's kind of the way I have been presenting it. I ask, are there any objections to omitting the item? And then, okay, seeing none, so ordered. Yeah. But I think it's a good point, Commissioner Johnson. Clearly, we want to be doing things according to Hoyle. So what's the next step? Is that a referral for staff to just find out if we're okay with the way we've been? Or is it just that going forward, we agreed to do certain items with a voice vote if there are no objections? Doug, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to make a quick comment. I know in the past, recently, when I was discussing how we were going to be doing the meetings and organizing things prior to a meeting, somebody from Claire, I think it was Vicky, had commented, "Oh, well, I hope they're doing a roll call vote after each item." And I said, "Oh, yeah, they are." So I kind of came to the conclusion that it is necessary. You're supposed to be doing a roll call vote. But we can find out further.
Okay, well, and you're right. It only adds a few more minutes. It's not that big of a deal. But if staff's going to take the time to figure out if that is what's necessary, then I would just say staff should also take the time to put out notification to all of the commissions and the council that it needs to be done that way.
Yeah.
Right. So we're all on the same page.
When you ask the question, are there any changes to the agenda? And there are no questions, and then we all vote to approve the agenda. It's as much as I love to play attorney, I will say asked and answered. And we've spent more time on this, so I appreciate your indulgence than we did on the actuality. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. All right, moving on to Commissioner Marin, please.
Nothing from me.
All right, and then Commissioner Solomon.
I'd just like to say thank you, Jennifer, for getting us the financial reports for the Peer Association and King Harbor Association. So thank you for that. That was very illuminating, and may come back at some future date. And then thank you, Chair Conroy, for being our chairman for the last year. Good job, and we'll have you back with the hoi polloi at the next meeting.
Sounds good. Thank you. All right, Commissioner Samples.
So being the rookie, I only have one question following on with Commissioner Johnson's question. Every month we stand up and do the Pledge of Allegiance. And I'm wondering if we can either play the national anthem or do that sitting down, because it's one of those two, or I've got to go on a major diet.
Adjust your camera angle, you'll be fine. And we're not looking at you.
That's all I have. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you, Commissioner or Chair Conroy.
Thank you. Thank you, Mel. All right. Then this time all I wanted to say is that it's been an honor serving as your chair for this past year. I've learned a lot, and I've truly enjoyed working with each one of you. And just due to everyone's dedicated service, I feel we've accomplished a lot, and that I look forward to what comes next. And thank you all. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, then with no other items, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. And a second?
Second.
All right, and with our final roll call vote of the evening, Commissioner Samples.
Aye.
Commissioner Solomon.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Marin. I didn't hear you, Commissioner Marin. Thank you. And the chair votes aye as well. Thank you, and we'll see you all again for our November meeting. Have a good night.
Good evening,
Thank you, everyone.